what do you think about AI and its impact on economics, economic growth? What are your opinions there?
Well, with the O3 Pro model from OpenAI, we already have AI that is smarter than most humans in most areas. It's not always smarter than an expert human or best human in the world, but even just a professional PhD, I think it would beat on a lot of exams. So that's quite impressive. But I think it will take us a long time in most areas to take advantage of that. It's the humans who are the obstacle or the barrier. We don't actually have society well set up to take advantage of additional intelligence. And now that we have it, we're a bit befuddled. Like, what do we do with this?
It's interesting that so you think it's less about the almost capacity of the sort of say science or technology behind it, and more like what can we do creatively as humans to like how do we implement this? And we you think we've only just started thinking about those issues? Like, is it,
A few areas like programming, it's obvious. It already does well over half the work. Some parts of graphic design, it's obvious. It does a big chunk of the work. But in most companies, to have some production process set up where the humans and AIs work together, we're very far from that. The humans don't know how to do it. There's not really anyone who can teach them. There isn't anyone who knows how to manage that process. I don't know what the time horizon is, but I think it will take at least 10 years to get a lot of the gains. And, that's forgetting about improvements in the model. One worry I have is the models will get so good, it will be harder for us to know how to use them because they'll give better answers than we can, and we won't even recognize it as the better answer. A bit like how chess playing computers often come up with moves that shock even, Magnus Carlsen.
are you there? It's interesting because I actually was at a economics talk, and one idea they had is what if AI is actually yeah, if imagine you have to go to AI for your solutions, like they can. So imagine they're almost would they run firms like instead of having sort of more, we use AI as well as a sort of solver, and we're the more intelligent one, and we sort of use AI as a tool to help us. What if instead there's some way in which AI is more intelligent than us, and then they're, as you say, right, it does things, can it like have creative ideas that we almost don't even understand, like this is
Oh, for
the way to
sure. I
go.
mean,
And
that's just coming. Part of the problem is we won't know when it has them, right? But
mm.
I think there'll be firms, not this year, but within 2 to 3 years, where there's, say, 1 to 3 human operators, a bunch of AIs who do the routine work, and the firm could become quite large. Or maybe it's a nonprofit or some kind of institution. I don't think that's very far away at all.
I mean, obviously, you're not a cognitive scientist or a sort of computer programmer that would understand the exact, say, details. But do you think, imagine AI is limited in some factor that we don't understand, like it's some way in which it can't mimic human creativity, or like what is your intuition on that? I know you're an economist, but like, do you have any thoughts on where it will stop AI?
I think it depends on the field of inquiry. I think in many fields there are quite serious limits. So, say in macroeconomics, I'm not sure AI will ever get much further. I don't blame the AI. I'm just not sure there are answers to a lot of the key questions. Or if you take physics, well, integrating general relativity and quantum mechanics, I'm far from convinced AI will ever do that. But again, it's not skepticism about the AI. I'm not even sure there is an answer. Maybe the universe is just stitched together in funny ways, and there is no overarching theory. Uh, so some people are overrating AI because they think all problems can be solved. They might turn out to be right, but I'm not convinced they are.
Mm. And your ideas on a stagnation of economic growth for kind of decades, does AI help? Do you think that in the short term there'll be a lot more economic growth? How does that sort of change or not your ideas on the stagnation?
Well, I wrote a Bloomberg column on this. My guess, and I stress the word guess, is that AI will boost productivity growth by half a percentage point for, say, the next 20 or 30 years. And compounded, that's an enormous, significant change. But it doesn't sound like that much to people. They say that and they think you're a Debbie Downer on AI. But I'm not. Nothing else is going to give us a boost that big. Part of the problem is the better AI gets, the more it butts up against other obstacles. It could be the cost of energy, it could be human opposition, it could just be government regulation. But that's one reason why, for me, that number isn't larger.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned things like, imagine could AI solve something like theories in physics, problems we're really having a tough time solving, and maybe there are no answers, like they kind of get to the edges of knowledge. And something I kind of want to ask you about was, even to what degree does economics, say as a more academic discipline, should it care about something like philosophy? Just in the sense of, I mean, um, for example, even something like behavioral economics, we go, oh, actually, maybe the degree to which preferences that people have are not actually stable. Or you get to the underlying ground of how the ways in which we see the world and the ways the world actually is. I mean, does economics need to care about these issues if we want to say understand macroeconomics? Does this question make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
um,
well, I think we need to care about them. But again, I'm not sure how much progress we'll make. Now, there's a growing class of people who think we will integrate AI with machine brain interface and make enormous progress on mental health and many other things. That's hard for me to judge. I keep an open mind. I just think a lot of things would have to go right for that to work. Uh,
mm,
but it's no longer crazy to think we'll make big progress on those questions. It used to just be, well, the brain, that's cut off from us knowing too much about it, may or may not be true in the more distant future.
mm. Do you think in the I wonder what you think of economic growth in the very long term. I mean, obviously it's hard to make forecasts in the long term, but do you think that, say, does something like AI change your views on the degree to which technology can lead to sustained growth?
I think measurements of sustained growth over the long term are not that meaningful. I think it will make the world very different and very much better for many people. I think just a lot more people say will live to be 100 years old. I'm not sure how to jam that into my growth number. I think in the very long run, we'll destroy ourselves, not necessarily because of AI, just powerful weapons. Some of them might be AIs, of course. It's already the case. We have drones. But nuclear weapons or something more powerful than nuclear weapons, at some point there'll be an accident and the growth rate will turn very negative very quickly. That would be uh, the forecast I most believe in.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've heard you say something along those lines of, like, in some ways you're bullish on the future, but then again, you have someone has nuclear weapons. Like, even if it's just pure accidents, something bad is going to go wrong at some point. I mean, um, you have any solutions to that, or what do you think that says about? I mean, I guess that's not necessarily an economic question. It's like, we have these weapons, we have destructive weapons. Like, what can you do other than?
I don't have any solutions. I like to think that AI modestly postpones when that happens. So if a flock of birds is coming in and someone thinks it might be nuclear weapons, we ought to be able to have AIs, or say Pakistan will have it, that will tell us the difference. In any given year, the chance of those accidents, to me, it's very, very low. I'm not immediately worried in any particular year. It just seems as the clock ticks, the cumulative probability density has to be pretty high. So I'm hoping AI will give us more years on Earth.
Mhm.
Maybe 3,000 years instead of 700 or whatever.
People are talking about falling fertility at the moment. Do you think that's a global risk? Like, what do you think about that?
It is a global risk. It's quite a recent phenomenon, so I don't think we should over index on a small number of years of data. But that said, it could be once you get stuck in that rut and your budget is in bad shape, it might be very hard to get out of it. So maybe in that sense, we should panic now. But it could just be in 10, 15 years, people go back to wanting a lot more children. That wouldn't shock me. But the alternative worry is maybe kids just aren't that much fun. And marrying before the age of like 31.7 isn't that great. And as the world gets richer, we'll just shrink, shrink, shrink. I take that very seriously. My hope, and again, this is very speculative, is that technological advances will enable us to subsidize babies to the tune of, say, $300,000 or $400,000 a year, and that will boost birth rates again. But we couldn't afford that right now.
Hmm. And I mean, it's interesting because I guess in modern economic growth, we think about people and then ideas as being a driver of growth. And even solutions say to something like climate change, we need people to come up with solutions. So even if there are fewer people, do we get the same kind of civilization, the same kind of growth, or
I
like
think it's
would
much
you?
worse. Just
Mm,
having fewer people is itself worse. Uh, Now, how much is it the numbers that drive creativity? That's a big debate. We all know ancient Athens, Renaissance Florence, they didn't have huge numbers. But still, it seems with bigger numbers, you maybe get more of a chance of having some of those episodes. And like, exactly which part of the world do I want to dwindle? Like, I don't want South Korea to basically disappear, but it's on track to. Uh, so, yeah, I think we ought to be greatly concerned for a multiple of consequentialist and also aesthetic reasons.
yeah. Um, I was listening to before we talked here. You had a podcast with Jeremy Grantham, and he was we're talking a lot about climate change, and I guess in his view, something like markets and capitalism is not good at say it's not pricing it in properly, and but on the other hand, you have people like the Nobel laureate Nordhaus kind of thinking, the hit to GDP is 5 to 10%, say, and we can adapt to climate change. I mean, do you think economics can solve a problem or understand a problem like climate change, or is it a tool set which cannot make sense of such a global issue?
It's hard to make sense of the issue. I don't blame economics per se. My biggest worry is this. I guess I'm more worried than Nordhaus. And I think of the pandemic. Well, there was a pandemic, which was terrible, but we also responded to it very badly and made a number of things much worse. I think climate change will be the same. We'll respond to it very badly. It's hard to predict how badly or in which ways. That gets back to your point that we don't have these really good behavioral models. But that to me makes the losses probably larger than people like Nordhaus are predicting. I'm not with Greta. Like Greta tweeted 5 years ago, like the world would end by today or something. Clearly, that's very far from true. But I think often we're not taking it seriously enough.
So what do you mean by we could end up making it worse for ourselves, like in trying to solve it, or in just leaving doing nothing? Like, tell me about what scenarios you might think would happen.
Well, I think all of those will happen at once. So, for instance, I think geoengineering is quite promising. It may be what we do, it may be what we should do. It might on net be a good thing. But when you think of, Putin's Russia doing its own geoengineering in conjunction with what we do, and is that going to go well for everyone? I think we're right to be quite skeptical that maybe on average it will work, but some parts of the world say could be ruined because of what Putin does. That would be a simple example, but I think there's many others. So the Nordhaus calculations don't take those kinds of problems into account.
Yeah, interest. It's just in actually trying to solve the issue, but like, would you say in something like if say the whole globe doesn't solve it in a concerted manner, like if people are willy nilly doing geoengineering here and there, or you know, policies that are counteracting each other, like, do you think there is a world where, with the right sort of concerted efforts, there could like global public goods efforts, there could be like, does it make sense in theory that
Oh, of course,
one?
but we'll never have that world. We can't even, get countries to oppose Putin in Ukraine.
Mm,
So we're very far from that world. I think that's close to impossible.
mm. It's like, because I mean, I'm it's something I'm still trying to understand, and from years of doing economics, I still don't really um kind of completely understand of to what degree. I mean, in modern times, we've had, obviously, in the past we've had debates of capitalism versus communism. And there's been so much new theories of economics, overturning of theories. Where do you think economic theory stands right now, say on markets versus government? Are there economists that have been proven right? Are there economists who, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, we thought they understand how economics works, but now we don't think they're right? Like, tell me a bit about our current understanding of economics.
Well, it's become polarized. Uh, I would say this: we should be seeing markets and capitalism as more important, but we also need to realize that markets and capitalism exist within the frameworks of strong, competent states, which the US has, Denmark has, depends on the country you look at, but to varying degrees. And you need both. And if you're doing things right, they're complements, not substitutes. That to me is the
Mm.
closest we have to a consensus. But I'm quite sure if you would ask other people, you would hear very different answers. But that's what I think is right.
Is that something which, because I'm wondering to what degree is a kind of, there's a bit of consensus but also a lot of arguing, and I'm wondering to what degree that's an economics sort of discipline issue versus, like, say in physics or chemistry. Are there probably is also a lot of debates there. I mean, I see that there are too. So is it just maybe any academic discipline would kind of always never be able to agree? I mean, I wonder, is there a world where there are like final statements, or are there ways in which these issues are kind of too complicated, like how to understand economics in a kind of comprehensive fashion?
Well, I think economists are largely puppets of the world. Like the world itself doesn't understand the world very well. And economists then fit into the slots sort of given to them. So the problem is everything, and we're the puppets. So again, I don't think economics per se is at fault. And we're not autonomous at all from politics and budgets and the politics of universities and so on. So that's where the differences come from. They don't really come from the science of economics.
But do you think that, so that's done? I mean, that's really interesting. Do you think that there is a science of economics that could be abstracted away from any politics? Like, is there other fundamentals which, like, you think, maybe people disagree with you, but that kind of would be true? You don't have to say them all, but like, what do you think that's kind of the case?
Oh, there is, of course. So the law of demand, demand curves slope downwards, just the ability to take a non political topic and estimate something using econometric statistics. That's nonpartisan. Our journals are full of it. It's there in great plenitude, plenitude. Uh, but it's also not what influences the world. The parts of economics that influence the world mostly are the parts that are puppets of the world, not the parts that are scientifically autonomous.
Mm.
It's not great that that's how it is, but again, I don't really think it's going to change. There was some study a while back, it showed if a person is both an economist and a Frenchman, the fact that he's a Frenchman predicts his views better than the fact that he's an economist.
Mm. I kind of wanted, because we talked about fertility, and I kind of wanted to ask about education and why college degrees seem to have, they're correlated with higher earnings. And there is this debate, this kind of ongoing, perhaps irresolvable debate of, is it a signaling thing? People of higher ability need to get education to show that they're higher ability, or is it actually helping them? What do you think about the way education is done? Is it something that, because for example, people do it for ages until perhaps if they do higher education into PhDs, is it a problem, a societal problem? Like, how should we think about modern day education?
Well, the economics profession has decided, perhaps in its own self interest, that it's mostly about building up human capital. I think they're underrating the signaling hypothesis a bit. But that said, as an educator, I do think it's mostly about human capital. It's not that you remember everything from your classes, but you just learn how things work. You become acculturated. You learn certain ways of behaving, certain norms. You develop networks. And without that, it's very hard to be quite successful unless you're, say, a tech genius or, music or playing chess in a few areas that are more or less autonomous. So I think higher education is pretty useful. We don't always do it well, but that's a bit of a separate issue.
Mm. Do you think that more people should do economics? How do you rate economics? I mean, I guess you would be
I
bullish on
don't
it.
think more people should do economics now. I think it's one of the disciplines in relatively better shape. I think it's also not an exciting time for economics. We have a lot of very high quality, what you would call ordinary research. Uh, the talented teenagers I've known who started wanting to do economics have been put off by the bureaucratization of the profession and the process, and they're doing things in tech or computational biology. So now is like a fine time for economics, but really not a great time, I would say.
Hmm. What makes a good economist? Like the skills or the mindset? Like, how is there a way to predict who will be a great economist?
Well, it's quite diverse. So you should be somewhat obsessive, extremely determined, have some very concrete skills, which will vary across fields, and be really curious about the topic and care about the real world. But you can have all those and somehow never quite, develop into a great economist. So I guess there's some feature of luck and your environment that feeds into it.
It's in your book on the greatest economists of all time. You talk about how in the modern day there's a way in which there are fewer economists who have a understanding of a range of different parts of economics, sort of being an all-rounder. Do you have any intuition on why that is? Is that a problem, or is that kind of maybe inevitable? You have the
I think it's
specialization.
inevitable. There's way more specialization. And as Adam Smith told us a long time ago, that's inevitable in most markets. Uh, it does make a lot of economists too narrow. There'll be economists who are technically very accomplished, but in essence, they just get their actual views about the world from NPR, BBC, New York Times. Maybe those are not the worst sources, but they're not the best sources. And that's what I think we see is a high degree of conformity in most parts of academia, and some kind of ultimate lack of fire in the belly when it comes to the real world. That's pretty common.
Mm. It's interesting because it's like, is that because the world has actually gotten too complicated, so it's a kind of irrational thing? Like, people, these economists go, I truly am not able to understand it. But whereas, and maybe I don't know if you'd agree, maybe you see some economists in the past kind of going, I want to have like a full understanding. I want to be able to have a definitive theory, even if I am crossing lines of like academic boundaries or.
Yes, that's a very good point, I think. We're now smart enough to know that the big think is going to fail, but I believe it would still be better if we tried much more of it. So, getting back to your signaling point, your goal on the economics job market, tenure market, is to signal the defensibility of your research. And that makes people very small c conservative. Again, I think we would do better off as a society if economists just took a question and tried to write whatever they could to answer the question. Maybe it would just be a survey article, which, say, today is not really worth much for tenure. But a super intelligent survey might get us much further than yet another hyper specialized, original, totally defensible, but really pretty boring piece of research.
Sometimes I see on, say, Substack or YouTube more controversial ideas, or like someone will have academic stuff and then the stuff which they're trying to explore different fields. Do you think maybe there's current modern day technologies that help being sort of having more diversity of opinion?
Oh, yeah. It
Um,
started with blogging, right? Now you would say it's Substack, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, YouTube, a lot of different places. So there's this very active big think economics community. Uh, it's not really high status per se, but listeners love it. You can become very well known. I mean, that's been part of what my own career has been. So
mm,
that's great. I wish it had sort of a greater integration with, say, what goes on in our top universities, but I'm working on that.
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, do you think that modern universities, as you say, so maybe there is a bit of a problem if people have similar views? Um, do you think that modern universities will become more or less prevalent? Like, or do you think that there will be kind of? Do you think? I mean, I guess maybe if there are people and a demand for these different kinds of ideas on these other platforms, then perhaps the universities in the long run have to kind of adjust a bit. But what do you think?
I don't know. I do think about this a fair amount. Uh, Clearly, the listeners and audiences adjust. So, actual students at a university, like they would be on average much more keen to meet me and talk with me than to meet with the person who won the last John Bates Clark Award. Uh,
Hmm.
Make of that what you will. Not everyone would approve of that change. I think it's good. And if I, say visit somewhere like Harvard, it's striking to me that the people at Harvard are much more concerned with being nice to me than I am with being nice to them. That tells you something. And maybe the things I do like actually flourish best if they are a bit removed from the main markers of professional status. So I'm not sure. I don't
Mm,
see the status quo breaking anytime soon, I guess, is my overall impression.
mm. I kind of asked a bit about economic theory. Um, what do you think of Austrian economics? I mean, is that a radical break from traditional theory? Is that what do they have right? Do they have wrong?
Well, there's so many different conceptions of Austrian
Okay.
economics. The one I like best is just the notion that there are special Austrian insights about the dynamics of market processes, that not everything should be thought of as an equilibrium, that discovery matters more than optimization, and those insights are still undervalued by the profession. That I'm 110% for. What I'm very skeptical about is the notion that Austrian economics could become this big thing which replaces mainstream neoclassical economics. Austrian economics just doesn't give people enough to do. When you make it empirical, it tends to collapse into case studies, sociology, anthropology. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just
Mm,
not really a replacement for neoclassical economics. So a lot of its partisans, to me, very much overrate Austrian economics, but still 99% of the world or more very much underrates it.
right. What do you think of the future of Bitcoin or, I mean, private monies? I mean, how important, maybe, first of all, do you think Bitcoin is like as an innovation and has it been?
It may be one of these, the truth lies somewhere in between issues, that everyone I talk to, they seem to either greatly underrate or overrate Bitcoin, but no one's ever in the middle. So I think it will be with us for, a long time, or if it's replaced, it will be replaced by a kind of successor that is derived from Bitcoin. It will become a part of mainstream financial institutions. We already see this happening very rapidly. I'm not sure how exciting or important that will be. Like,
Mm,
there's a lot of, say you turn on an electricity switch in your home and the light goes on. Like, that's important, but there's a lot of components in there. In a way, they're not that exciting or that significant. Like, it's the way we figured out how to do it, and what we did is super important. But the components are the components, and you get to the point where you don't think about them. So I think there's quite a good chance a lot of crypto may be that it will work quite well. It will ease a number of things, but it will end up like the wiring inside your house behind the electrical switch. And crypto proponents typically think like, oh, it will abolish the nation state, or it will change the whole world, or it will this, it will that. I don't know. I don't really see signs of that. But the people, oh, it's all fraud, it's all bubbles, it's all tax evasion, that also seems wrong to me. So I'd
right.
say the truth lies somewhere in between.
I mean, do you think that it was surprising that something like Bitcoin exists, or have that? I kind of, I'm trying to think for myself at the moment, right now. I mean, I guess there were private monies beforehand, so I'm
It's a
just
truly
wondering.
new idea, Bitcoin.
Hmm,
I actually blogged, I think it was in 2007 or so, before Bitcoin. I blogged something like, well, someday we'll learn that money is really just an issue in, cryptographic problems. I had nothing like Bitcoin in mind or, the general's problem. I had no inkling of all that. But people vaguely knew this was a thing. The internet monies of the 1990s, people toyed with related ideas. But still, before the 90s, you see no signs of this. And it just refutes the notion that there are no truly new ideas, because this was one of them.
um, on that, so it's on that notion of money, I was listening to one of your podcasts on sort of new monetary views of kind of almost the opposite of a quantity theory of money, maybe that the money supply is instantly and like tracks inflation, and more of how do we even measure the money supply, and like how should we think about monetary policy in a world where we have monies like Bitcoin that people can, it's not even traditional money in the way we normally thought about it, and now maybe governments are going to be putting some money into Bitcoin. So how should we think about the world of money now?
I think stable coins will matter much more for monetary policy than Bitcoin will. They will make it yet harder to properly understand what's the money supply that matters. I think it means central banking will become all the more discretionary and improvised and make it up as you go along. I think we have enough talent in the major central banks to manage that, but it will feel very weird and kind of hairy. And, we're always going to make mistakes, as we did in 2008, 2009, as we did in 1929. In Great Britain, I guess it would be 1926 when you went back to the wrong gold parity. So, stable coins will create yet a new ambiguity in what the supply of dollars really means. I'm not sure
Mm,
Bitcoin itself will matter much for monetary policy, but crypto will.
okay. We talked a bit about um, economic theory and how we should think about it. And I wondered what your views are on the efficient market hypothesis, or even hypotheses. I mean, there's different ways to think about it. How do you think about it?
Well, the efficient markets hypothesis, which everyone loves to dump on, but it's true for 99.9% of all humans, probably more. It's just true. You can't beat the market. Now, that said, if you go to Susquehanna, Citadel, Jane Street, can those institutions as institutions beat the market for sustained periods of time? Uh, I would say clearly the answer is yes. So the efficient markets hypothesis cannot be strictly fully 100% true. But for almost all the questions you face in actual life and investing, you should act as if it's true. It's better than almost any other theory.
Hmm. Because it's interesting. I brought up climate change, and I would,
XTX also, you're in Britain. Well, you're
yeah,
from Britain,
yeah.
so we have to mention them as well, right? They've done it. Congratulations.
Well, and it's interesting because okay, you say, well, maybe there are certain firms that exist that can beat the market, but it's almost like by virtue of existing, they've kind of filled a niche. Like you couldn't then create another Jane Street if they have the maybe like the knowledge. Like it's by virtue of them
Exactly.
existing, it's
Yes.
part of the equilibrium, I guess.
There's room for
um,
so many. I don't know the number. Like XTX is newer than Jane Street. So the
mm,
number's not fixed, but you can't have 400 companies like that. I doubt if you can have 40. But are they done? My guess is we'll still get some more,
yeah.
especially with AI blossoming.
What are our opinions which you've or changed sort of the most in the past few years?
Well, the most. I mean, that's hard to say. So I would say, 20 years ago, I just was agnostic about global warming, not a skeptic, but I just hadn't read much about it. And over time, I've read much more and I've become more worried. Would you say that's a change of opinion? Well, you could.
Mm,
Uh, in 2007, I thought we had no real estate bubble. 2008 came, and I think, my goodness, we had a real estate bubble and it burst. We're now in 2024, and I look at home prices, including in London, many places, and I think it wasn't a bubble after all. The market was basically on track in 2007. We had some weird panic. So there, I've been wrong at least twice, maybe more to come. So most views,
yeah.
like, you should be changing in some big ways. At first, I thought Bitcoin was a bubble. That was wrong. And I said so on Marginal Revolution, like, big mistake. And I was shocked when it got to be, worth $1,000 a coin. That was just stupid, but that would be another example. But, like, could it be overpriced now? Of course. I'm not committed to any particular view as to what the price should be.
Tell me more about that great financial crisis, and almost how can we even say it's? I mean, that's a kind of a constant debate of to what degree can we say something's a bubble when you have to. Maybe it depends on your time horizon, but if it was say just a panic, or what happened during the great financial crisis, admittedly a difficult problem to sort of put to you, but what do you think
Well,
happened?
this is my current view, and I don't think we've worked through all the details yet. But 2008, people start realizing there's this thing which we now call the shadow banking system. It's not covered by deposit insurance. It can be prone to runs, and people panicked and they ran on it when they actually didn't have to. Like, we had a real estate bubble burst in the early 90s that led to a mild recession, and no one panicked, and shadow banking was smaller, and there was not as much to panic about. This time we panicked. We didn't have to panic, but we did, and there was a lot of social pressure. And this whole narrative, oh, huge real estate bubble, was reinforced. And I was tricked by this. Like, it's my fault too. I was taken in by the social pressure. I should have stuck to my 2007 intuitions that there was no real estate bubble and that homes were permanently more valuable. and I should have called out the panic for what it was. But no, I was wrong. I was stupid, whatever. I was too conformist.
I mean, it's a fascinating thing with economics, though, that if other people are all leaving the market, at that point, maybe it is rational to leave and then come
Yeah,
back in. I don't know. Yeah.
of
So,
course. And intellectually, it's like the bubble had burst on people saying there was no bubble. So I left that market, so to speak. Uh, but I should have just said, no, this looks like a bubble, but it's a panic, and home prices are going to come back. That's what I should have said.
mm. And with climate change, what changed your mind there? Is that like looking more at the climate science or like,
Well,
because it's in,
climate science itself becomes more advanced, and just being exposed to the sheer diversity of different kinds of science, whether it's oceanography or the people who study insects or the people who study tree rings or clouds or different measurements, the sheer diversity of empirical factors pointing in the same direction made a big impression on me. And again, you could say, well, I should have known more about that to begin with. Some of it wasn't there yet, but a lot of it was just I had not had the time to do the reading and talk to the people. That would be the
mm.
main thing. So, more an evolution of views than a change of mind. I don't think I repudiated some earlier view I held.
Interesting. Kind of more information, and I brought it up before because I kind of found it fascinating, like because is it kind of a new kind of problem for humanity that we have this we can have a global impact on, say, the whole Earth, and I don't think maybe it's not even related, just maybe it's a broader set of problems because it's not just climate change, but you could think about, imagine like the threat of asteroids. We have to all collaborate to say, do we, it's a public good of asteroid protection, or even pandemics, perhaps. That's kind of another example. Like, do these kinds of things point to a kind of class of problems that we need to think about?
Yeah, it's a reason to think we'll eventually destroy ourselves. Again, it's not that I think climate change will do that. That seems very unlikely to me. Even an asteroid large enough is pretty unlikely. But just the sheer fact that we can destroy ourselves through whatever number of mechanisms. Some would say bioterror. That to me seems overrated. But again, the chance can be very small. When you consider the cumulative probability distribution, it looks to me like we're kind of screwed.
Okay. I mean, what do you think of ideas of degrowth? Or, I mean, or even because when you say that, it's interesting. I mean, as an economist, I should be against it, but it's also interesting to even think about the big picture of civilization. I mean, if you do have these existential risks, does that mean one must need to think about updating views of like the whole path of civilization we're going down? That might not be helpful. Not that we can change it even if we wanted to, but
Well, the UK is doing degrowth, right? People hate it.
yeah.
If someone said to me in the abstract, wouldn't it be better if we went back to the year 1700 when life expectancy was terrible, but maybe we keep penicillin or something? But, there was no birth control and families had 7 kids and 4 of them survived and there were no nuclear weapons. Like, how stable is that in the long run? I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, primates go extinct. So I don't think there's a simple way to get on a stable, permanent track. And furthermore, we know, like, you're not going to get Putin to go back to 1700. So you've got to press ahead and hope you can pull off this incredible balancing act.
Mm. Who are, one of your favorite economists that are maybe underrated? Let's say in the past, like historically.
Well, Albert Hirschman has become underrated. He should have won a Nobel Prize for Exit Voice and Loyalty and other works, and he didn't. My former colleague Gordon Tullock, highly underrated, should have won a Nobel Prize for rent seeking. Arnold Harberger of the Harberger Triangle, he's still alive. He's 100 years old. Uh, Super underrated, no Nobel Prize. How can that be? We use his ideas all the time. There are a few names that come to mind right away, but there are many more.
I mean,
Banker
for those.
Olson. He
Mm.
didn't win a prize because he died prematurely, but I feel he's being forgotten a bit, and he's actually one of the most important economists.
I wonder what makes someone say, you say maybe we use their ideas, but then we kind of forget about the person. Like, is it that we can use ideas, but maybe their papers weren't as cited or they weren't as vocal in their view? Like, what do you think makes someone underrated or like underappreciated?
Yeah, that just they become superfluous. Typically, they've passed away. Maybe their students are aging. No one has to pay fealty to them anymore. Like even Gary Becker, one of the greatest economists of all time, a super impressive guy, and he had a very large number of accomplished students. He's not read much anymore. And he too is underrated. Milton Friedman is underrated. Like they're all underrated almost.
Yeah.
Like a few people, like you look at literature, it's quite obvious. Like way more people know Shakespeare and Jane Austen, but there's many, many works that are just quite neglected. It's the superstar effect. So in economics, you could say, well, Keynes, Adam Smith, I would say they're extremely robust, but even some very great, very significant figures like Becker are now underrated.
Yeah, I read a Becker paper recently because economists in my school recommended it, and I had never really, and maybe I should do that more with economists in general, is go back and read some of these great papers, and so maybe, I mean, maybe you could recommend some. I mean, what would economists say even then in terms of their writing, like stand out even now if you go back and read them?
Well, Hirschman and Olson would be two of my picks, whom I mentioned as underrated. It depends a lot what you're interested in. Like a lot of things just don't click with most people most of the time. That's fine. I think the new frontier is to learn how to query GPT models and Claude to get great answers. And they're capable of that now. People think like, oh, it's all hallucinations or it just gives you Wikipedia. I mean, that's quite wrong. I would say invest the $2,500 to get the O3 Pro model and let that rip. You're really going to learn a lot.
So that O3 is on chat. That's on OpenAI's.
That's on OpenAI's. And
Right.
the O3 model is very good. It's as good as O3 Pro for most verbal questions. But O3 Pro for calculating, modeling, solving problems is phenomenally good. And in fact, most humans are not good enough to really appreciate how good it is.
How do you think that changes the distribution of skills and wages? Like, does that make, say, current, I don't know, academics more productive? Like, their writing gets better, they can explore more ideas. Does it create almost the people who can use it the best and think about it now? Will they be more valuable in the future?
Yes, but a lot of us become worthless also. It's really tough. And
You
a
think,
lot of
huh?
grad students, undergraduate students, you wonder, why are we teaching people this, that, and the other when at the end of the day, they're not as good as my GPT? Now, okay, it's true the person has a physical instantiation in the world, so they can execute tasks a GPT cannot. But over some time horizon, that all will change. And I worry where it's not just economics, it's most things. I worry about how we're investing resources.
Mm. One final thing I'm interested in is what do you think the importance of the history of economics is? They're both the history, but I kind of want to, because I'm thinking more in general, like empirical. How can we learn from history, from real world events versus theory? Since I guess modern economics is a lot more empirical, we think we can sort of have better and better causal inference tools. But what should we draw from sort of economic history and empirics?
Well, you realize you don't know as much as you think, is the main lesson. Like you're going to learn some very concrete things, but most of all, you learn you're in a fog. Whether it's economic history or history of economic thought, you learn how difficult it is to really know things. And all the professional incentives are pointing you in the other directions. Like, oh, here's this one fact I've established, it's defensible, I'm going to try to publish it. And that's a dangerous mentality to let dominate your mind.
Mm. You had a Bloomberg post I saw on the legalization of marijuana. Um, what do you stand on that? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's been this kind of liberal push of like, I guess it will be good and it has had some benefits. I mean, what do you think is the overall impact?
Well, I think first, marijuana is very bad for people. Second, my libertarian views tell me we should never send people to jail just for smoking pot or whatever it is they do with related substances. And I stick with that. But as a pragmatist, I recognize what a lot of US states and cities have done is not working. It's not popular. and it will be reversed over time. So we need a better version of legalization and decriminalization where it is less in the public sphere. When mothers take their kids to school in the morning, they're not walking past the smell of pot. And if we don't come up with a way of doing that, we're going to lose the benefits we've had from legalization. And I'm very concerned about that. So I do think we need more restrictions of some kind, but I'm not willing to let those restrictions be throwing people in jail.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. This has been really fun. I probably don't need to point people to where your work is. They probably came more for you than me, but Marginal Evolution blog, and where else would you like to point them?
Oh, they can just ask GPT about me, right? Or Claude. Like, what do you need the rest for at this point? It
Of
will tell
course.
you where to go.
Okay. Thank you.
A pleasure chatting, and let me know when it's out. I will blog it.